On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, Day 173. Hostage negotiations have officially broken down. Negotiators are now going to try to find a way to bring the parties back to the table. Hamas releases a video of Al-Qassam leader Muhammad Def calling upon Muslims to begin their march towards Palestine and to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque. A dozen people were reported killed when a tent in the Humanitarian Al-Muwasi refugee camp zone was reportedly hit by an IDF bombing. Attacks are also reported in Rafah and around Al-Shifa hospital. Ongoing escalations between the IDF and Hezbollah. Hezbollah's barrages target Kiryat Shmona, killing an Israeli civilian. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, Amal, and the Islamic group all report casualties. Israeli Prime Minister's office is rescheduling the delegation that is headed to DC to discuss the Rafah invasion, days after Netanyahu cancelled it in protest of the United States abstaining in the UN Security Council. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of March 27, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 28, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, despite the breakdown in negotiations, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller stated today that Washington does not think that the hostage talks are officially over. It was also reported that Egypt and Qatar are trying to figure out a formula to bring the sides back to the negotiating table. However, realistically, the Israeli delegation has left Qatar. The Hamas delegation that was part of the negotiations is no longer part of the negotiations. All that is left in Doha is a skeletal crew in order to, quote-unquote, discuss the technical sides of what might become a future hostage negotiation. Right now, the negotiating countries are going to try to figure out a formula to both pressure Israel and Hamas in order to possibly come back together. Right now, the sides are very far apart and steadfast in their different positions. Related to that, Khaled Mashal, who's the former external leader of Hamas and one of its most prominent external figures, stated today, I quote, "The movement's leadership is waging a negotiation battle not less intensely than the battle that is being waged in the field. We will win in the field and we will win in the negotiations." He repeated the movement's demands, stating, "We are insisting on an end to the aggression," that means a permanent ceasefire, IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, restoring all internally displaced people, particularly in northern Gaza, and supplying all necessary aid, adding that Hamas will not release any hostages unless it achieves all of those goals. So again, he is conveying that Hamas is still steadfast that all of the group's goals, the end goal, that includes a complete ceasefire and IDF withdrawal, have to be part of the negotiation rounds from the beginning. Israel has categorically rejected that, so right now the sides are very far apart with regards to having any common ground to debate. However, once again, the negotiating parties are going to try to figure out if they can come up with a formula that will bring them back to the table. Remains to be seen. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there was a rocket that was fired from the Gaza Strip targeting the area of Kisufim in the last 24 hours. It reportedly fell in open area. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, Palestinian sources reported IDF bombings in the areas around Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City, leading to fires breaking out in several different apartments around the hospital. In addition, the fighting in the hospital compound continues, with more gun battles reported and weaponry reportedly constantly being located in the different facilities of the hospital. IDF sources stated today that intelligence indicates that there are at least 2 more high-profile Hamas leaders that are hiding in Al-Shifa hospital, as well as other people that are defined by the IDF as prime targets due to their intelligence potential. So right now, the fighting is still ongoing. The IDF has still not published all of what it claimed was very high-profile arrests that occurred in Al-Shifa, stating that they're going to first finish their interrogations and only then publish that. So it remains to be seen what actually has been discovered in Al-Shifa, who are the most high-profile arrests, and again, who are these other figures that possibly are still hiding there. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF reported an airstrike targeting the operative who fired a rocket towards Kisufim, and he was reportedly killed. There were other gun battles that were reported in and around the central camps. It does not report specifically where. Commonly, this is either in the outskirts of a Nusrat refugee camp or a barrage refugee camp, or along the Netzarim or Nusrat corridor that the IDF is maintaining. Either way, a lot of gun battles were reported in those areas. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Khan Yunis, bombing was reported near the Nasser hospital in the city. It was reported in the last several days that the IDF has been moving towards Nasser hospital, and some reports on the ground suggested that the IDF has actually surrounded the hospital with armored divisions. Now there's bombings that are being reported around the hospital. Likely we will see the IDF moving into that hospital in the coming days. In addition, in the Al-Amal operation, the IDF reported uncovering new tunnel networks within the neighborhood, some of which extend very close to Nasser Hospital, as well as continuously having gun battles in the region and uncovering lots of weaponry. In Rafah, bombings were reported in two separate areas. One of them was Herbat al-Adas and the other one was Ash-Shaot areas, targeting at least two different houses. 3 people were reportedly killed in these different bombings. In addition to this, it was reported today that a tent area in the Al-Muwasi refugee camp housing internally displaced Palestinians was bombed, killing at least 12 people. While it was not reported specifically where this was in Al-Muwasi, I'll say that Al-Muwasi refugee camp is an elongated corridor along the coast. I have stated in the last several days that the Al-Amal operation, where the IDF is operating in the western parts of Khan Yunis, is very adjacent. The outskirts of it actually bleed into the Al-Muwasi refugee camp, so it is very possible that this bombing is a result of sort of bleeding over from the operation in Al-Amal. However, it is also possible it was further down south near Rafah. Either way, this is one of the first times that in the Al-Muwasi refugee camp specifically, there were reported bombings that targeted that area, reportedly a tent compound, and 12 people were killed. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. Hamas published a video today showing a shadowy figure and the narration of what they reported was Muhammad Def, the leader of the Al-Qassam brigades. This is an older recording. It was actually previously published already on October 7th, and the organization published it again today through its different social media outlets and its websites. In the movie, Def calls upon the Arab and Muslim world to begin their march towards Palestine and to liberate Al-Aqsa in the name of jihad. He specifically mentions Muslims in the nations of Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, Pakistan, and Malaysia, stating that all must take part in the fight and, quote, leave today so you are not stopped at the borders tomorrow. There were conflicting reports about the republication of this right now, at this particular timing. Hamas sources stated to various different outlets that this comes amidst the breakdown in negotiations and the expectation that there's going to be escalations in the coming weeks, and this is Hamas's attempt to try to sort of wake up the Muslim and Arab world leading up to these confrontations. I will say also that other non-Hamas Palestinian sources in the Gaza Strip suggested that the republishing of this now is a sign of desperation and almost a call for help. It's also possible, this is my own speculation, Hamas has expected a lot of regional violence, specifically in the West Bank and in the Arab world, to erupt surrounding Ramadan. Right now what we're seeing is possibly a sign of the group's disappointment with the fact that we're already more than halfway past the month of Ramadan and escalations have not happened as a result of this month. It is possible also leading to the last Fridays of Ramadan, where there are commonly escalations around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that Hamas is trying to stir up the ground. That may also be one of the reasons that this was published. Either way, this was published today. Other news related to the Gaza Strip, and this time relating to a future Rafah operation. After Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu cancelled the delegation that was supposed to travel to D.C. and discuss the invasion of Rafah with the U.S. administration, Netanyahu stated today in his meeting with Florida Senator Rick Scott that cancelling the delegation after the UN Security Council resolution was meant as a message for Hamas, demonstrating that they should not rely on this international pressure to hold Israel back. Hours later, however, NBC reported that Netanyahu's office informed the White House that Israel would like to reschedule the meeting in order to discuss the plans for Rafah. Netanyahu's office then denied these publications. However, once the White House actually put out their own statement, stating that the meeting is being rescheduled and a date was being explored by the administration, senior sources in Israel reported that Netanyahu has not approved this yet. However, he is likely to approve the delegation to be rescheduled already next week. Alongside this, Israel's Channel 13 reported today that senior U.S. officials informed Israel of their intent to send U.S. generals to directly discuss operational plans for Rafah with IDF officials. While a similar move was done at the beginning of the war, coordination between the militaries, senior Israeli officials today stated that in the current context, this is a clear sign of mistrust and an attempt to bypass the political establishment in Israel and instead have direct communication between military experts, i.e. generals, in the U.S. Army, with the military experts in Israel. Amidst all this, Al-Ahbar, which is a Lebanese Hezbollah affiliate, cited Egyptian sources today as stating that as the hostage negotiations collapsed, Israeli and U.S. officials applied monumental pressure on Qatar and Egypt to compel Hamas to agree to the terms of a truce. The report also adds, however, that the Israeli delegation informed the Egyptians that Israel is not going to make more concessions to reignite the negotiations, and threatened that barring a truce, the ground offensive against Rafah will commence at the end of Ramadan, or at latest at the beginning of May. The report adds that prior to the offensive, more localized attacks will be carried out to pave the way for the invasion, and that the Israeli delegation informed their colleagues that the operation in Rafah is expected to take between 4 to 8 weeks. So again, All this brings us to the fact that on the one hand, Israel is making ongoing plans for this invasion. According to all the reports, Netanyahu has repeatedly stated that he has approved these plans. On the other hand, it is also becoming more and more clear that Israel is not going to carry out this invasion unless they manage to get U.S. support, or at least convince the United States to not be outright against the invasion. And thus this delegation is going to go. If we evaluate the timetable, if this delegation is going to leave next week and then possibly negotiate with the United States, then we'll see in 2 weeks from now, or in a week and a half, Ramadan is over. So at least according to that timetable, barring a truce or breakthrough negotiations, the invasion of Rafah may begin anywhere within 2 weeks from now. It was also reported previously that when the operation begins, it's probably going to take at least 2 weeks to evacuate the civilians before the actual invasion happens. So it remains to be seen how all this played out, but likely we'll start to see the development of this in the next, I would say, 10 days to 2 weeks. Regarding casualties, 1 IDF soldier is reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 253. 11 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,520. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 76 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 32,490. 74,889 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. And I remind everyone there's still several thousand Palestinians that are reportedly buried under the rubble. All these are presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, joint air paradropping missions of humanitarian aid were carried out throughout the day, for the first time with Spain's participation in these missions. 5 cargo planes carried out these missions, with 1 plane respectively coming from Jordan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Germany, and Spain. I want as a caveat when I say 1 plane coming from all these places are actually taking off from Jordan. The entire humanitarian apparatus of paradropping aid into the Gaza Strip is being orchestrated by Jordan. However, these different countries are sending planes to Jordan and then carrying out the missions themselves, but the entire mission is being done under the auspices of the Jordanian Air Force. The IDF reported that these missions contained 136 aid packages that were paradropped in the Gaza Strip, each weighing 1 ton. In addition to this, the IDF reported that 274 aid trucks carrying food, water, shelters, and medical supplies entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, and that in coordination with the military, 25 food trucks were successfully delivered to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the West Bank, in last night's report, I stated that an IDF operation was beginning around Jenin in the areas of Jenin refugee camp. That operation is still ongoing and has been escalating in the last 24 hours. Armed Palestinians in a car were targeted with an IDF airstrike, killing 2 people. A third Palestinian, 19-year-old Walid al-Osta, was also injured in this attack and died of his wounds throughout the day. IDF engineering units also destroyed a car that was packed with explosives after the car's passengers were arrested, and another Palestinian was killed in confrontations as he threw explosive charges and pipe bombs towards the soldiers. 5 more Palestinians were reported injured in the confrontations that occurred in Jenin refugee camp, and again that operation is still ongoing. Substantial weaponry and explosives were uncovered in this operation, and several arrests were made. Other IDF activity was also reported in the areas of Deir Balut near Salfit, as well as several other areas in the West Bank. Throughout the West Bank, the IDF reported that 10 Palestinians were arrested in the last 24 hours. Other news related to the West Bank, the civil administration in the West Bank, that is the IDF unit that is in charge of managing daily life and governing the West Bank, announced plans to expand the municipal region of the Shiloh settlement, this is north of Ramallah, in an attempt to include within it the unauthorized settlement of Achia. The process itself could take a long time. However, it comes amidst announcements last week where the civil administration declared some 8,159 dunams, that is just over 2,000 acres, in the West Bank that are going to be designated as state lands. The importance of that is that due to legal issues from the past 50 years, declaring an area in the West Bank, or the Gaza Strip for that matter, as state lands is a required step in order to allow the establishment of settlements which would be considered legal in Israel's eyes in the Palestinian territories. Again, within the Israeli legal framework, there is a difference between settlements that are established legally within Israel's parameters on state lands, and unauthorized settlements which, even by Israel standards, are considered illegal in the Palestinian territories. Other news, which may have repercussions for the West Bank. The Washington Post published a report today about Marwan Barghouti. He is arguably the most famous Palestinian prisoner and one of the quote-unquote heaviest Palestinian prisoners that Hamas is demanding be released in the hostage deal. The report states that the United States and Arab countries are growing concerned about his treatment in Israeli jails, and that while this has not been made public, the State Department officials are quoted as saying that they have talked to Israeli authorities about this and demanded thorough investigations. The report quotes his son, stating that since October 7th, Barghouti has been repeatedly attacked both physically and psychologically in Israeli jails, among others stating that after the attack he was placed in isolation for 12 days in a row, and that the Israeli national anthem was played at high volume in his cell from morning to night. His lawyer is quoted in the report as stating this as well. This is the second time such allegations related to Marwan Barghouti's treatments have made the headlines, as it was also reported several weeks ago. The Red Cross is also quoted in the Washington Post report as stating that the organization has repeatedly requested that Israel cancel the ban on Red Cross visits to Palestinian prisoners. This ban was imposed by Israel's Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, after October 7th, and that the Red Cross is requesting to visit Marwan Barghouti in order to assess his conditions. Responding to all this, Israel's prison services stated that the organization is a law-abiding organization and that such claims are not known. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. After the escalations I reported upon yesterday, there were continuous escalations also in the last 24 hours. Rockets and missiles were fired from Lebanon, targeting the areas of Reches Ramim, Shtula. There was also a crashed Hezbollah drone that was located in the areas of Rosh Nikra in northern Israel. The IDF is investigating the circumstances of that drone. In addition, regarding the fighting between the sides, yesterday I concluded the report by stating that the IDF had just carried out a dawn attack in the areas of El Habaria. Today, Hezbollah promised another retaliation. Hours later, barrages of over 50 rockets were fired towards Israel, targeting the areas of Kiryat Shmona and the surrounding areas of Tel Chai, Mayan Baruch, Kfar Yuval, and Kfar Giladi. Several of these rockets were intercepted, but a few did manage to hit Kiryat Shmona, causing substantial damage in and around the city. One Israeli citizen, Zahir Salah, was killed when a rocket hit a factory in the area. With these escalations, there have been over 110 rockets and missiles that were fired into Israel in the last 2 days from Lebanon. Regarding IDF activity, responding to the deadly rocket attack, the IDF launched a series of airstrikes throughout southern Lebanon, as well as targeting two reportedly quote-unquote significant targets deeper in Lebanon. Among the airstrikes in southern Lebanon, the IDF carried out attacks against Hezbollah units that were identified in the areas of Tir Herfa, and in addition there was also an attack against units of the Amal movement in Anakora. Pictures were disseminated from the Tir Herfa attack showing that the vehicle belonged to the Islamic Health Network, and that is the vehicle that was targeted. The Islamic Health Network is one of the arms of Hezbollah. It operates its social services, but also operates as a front for a lot of its military activity. 6 people were reportedly killed in the Tir Herfa attack, 3 in the Anakora attack, bringing the total number of people that were killed in Lebanon as a result of these attacks to 9. In addition, there was more information that was given today about the unusual attack that the IDF carried out yesterday in El Habaria. I reported about this right at the end of my report. This was an attack that occurred at dawn in the Middle East, deep in northeastern areas of Lebanon. According to reports, the target was a structure that belonged to the Islamic group, or in Arabic, the Jama'ah al-Islamiyah. This is a Sunni organization in Lebanon, which was also the target of an IDF attack on March 10th, and which has been participating to a limited extent in the war, firing rockets from Lebanon into Israel, the first time already in October. However, since then, there have been more reports that it may have participated in other rocket launches towards Israel. According to what was published, the 7 people who were killed in this attack are operatives of this group and not part of Hezbollah, and intelligence indicates that they had been developing a plan to carry out a cross-border insurgency into Israel in the area of Hardov, and some reports say that they were on their way to carry it out, and that is why that attack occurred at that moment. In all of these different attacks, Hezbollah announced that 3 more of its operatives were killed in the past 24 hours, bringing the total number of operatives that Hezbollah says were killed since the war began to 256. Israel states that number is much higher. The Amal movement also announced that 2 of its operatives were killed in the Anakora attack in the last 24 hours. Moving on to some of the political and general trends for the last 24 hours. After meeting the Iranian Foreign Minister Abdullahian and Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei, Hamas's leader Ismail Haniyeh met today with the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. Raisi stated to him, "We have always been and always will be with the Palestinian people. Countries that normalize their relations with Israel are ashamed today. Complete inevitable victory will be of the Palestinian people." So that is a statement that he made. The two reportedly met to discuss the developments in the war and, more broadly, the situation in the Middle East. Other political news. Amidst the growing escalations within the West Bank and confrontations and the mass amounts of arrests that have been made, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, began a process today of amending the law pertaining to the minimum age of sentencing people on charges of terrorism, lowering the minimum age of jail sentencing from 14 to 12. The law stipulates that anyone who is found guilty of causing death in terror circumstances can be sentenced to jail time already from the age of 12 and will be locked in a facility until age 14 before being transferred to an adult prison. The law now passes the next stages of legislation, so it's not passed into law yet. However, it has passed the initial stages. In addition to this, a law that is more advanced and being prepared to be voted upon in Israel's parliament is the new proposal to allow the Ministry of Communications, in coordination with the Prime Minister, to order the closing of foreign news channels in the country and blocking their access to Israel. The law, which has been dubbed the Al Jazeera Law, has been proposed for the duration of the war, with terms applied to its use and limiting its use on the one hand, however granting the Minister of Communications sweeping abilities to close down media channels, block their access as well as their internet sites in the country, if the terms are approved on the other hand. Other political news, the United States and the United Kingdom have announced sanctions that will be implemented against two Palestinians who run the Gaza Now network. This is a network that disseminates Hamas propaganda on social media. It was not reported specifically what these sanctions are going to include. And finally, in a New York Times article, Israel's Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir, he's also head of the Jewish Power Party, was quoted today in a report as stating that Biden prefers the path of Rashida Tlaib and Yahya Sinwar over the path of Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir. Ben-Gvir has repeatedly stated in Israel's cabinet that Israel should stop trying to placate the United States, carry out an all-out invasion of Rafah. He's also called for canceling all humanitarian aid that comes into the Gaza Strip until all the hostages are released. If you find these reports important, please remember to give them a like, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.